Hello, everybody, and welcome to the webinar. This is an introduction to the Mobile SDK, and we will be focusing on building hybrid applications. Of course, it would not be a Salesforce webinar if we didn't go through the safe harbor slide. This basically just says that if you're going to make any purchasing decisions, please make them based on current features and not any future-looking statements that myself or Akhilesh might make. And allow us to introduce ourselves. My name is Josh Burke. I'm a developer evangelist with Salesforce.com. I am hailing from the sunny city of Chicago, and a few time zones away from me is Mr. Akhilesh Gupta. Akhilesh, why don't you introduce yourself to the crowd?
Thanks, Josh. Hi, everyone. This is Akhilesh Gupta. I'm mobile evangelist at Salesforce.com, and I'm also one part of the Mobile SDK team over here. So reach me out at Akhilesh Gupta Twitter handle if you have any questions. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Ak. And as you can see, if you can spell our names, you can probably figure out our Twitter handles. I'm at Josh Burke. Akhilesh is at Akhilesh Gupta. Please feel free to give us a shout out on the Twitters either during the webinar or after the webinar. And if you would like to follow Developer Force on the favorite social media channel of your choice, we do have a few options for you. We have an official Twitter account at force.com. And if you want to give us a shout out during the webinar, you can use the hashtag #Force webinar. We will be monitoring that during the show. We also have a Facebook page, a Google Plus page, a YouTube channel, and a LinkedIn Developer Force group. If you have any questions during the webinar, we do have a crack team of expert panelists who are going to try to answer your questions in real time. You can just put those questions into the GoToWebinar question pane. Those questions will also be documented, and Akhilesh and I will be reviewing them towards the end of the webinar for a Q&A session. And finally, we do compile those questions into an FAQ that goes with the webinar once it goes live up on developerforce.com. Our agenda is pretty straightforward today. We're going to give you an introduction to hybrid applications, what we actually mean when we use that term. We're going to show you a few examples of building a hybrid application. And then we're also going to jump into the new Mobile SDK 2.0, and Akhilesh is going to highlight some of the key features of that SDK and as they pertain to building out hybrid applications. Now, we only have a few working assumptions here. We kind of assume that you have some baseline web application development. One of the nice things about hybrid development is that you get to leverage your HTML, JavaScript, and CSS skills. But of course, since we are talking about mobile applications on the platform, we're also going to be looking at the Salesforce Platform API, or using it at least. And a few of our examples are going to be leveraging Visualforce and a little bit of Apex. Now, in general, for your mobile needs, Salesforce has a few options for you. On one side, we have our core applications that don't require any coding or anything like that. You can just download them from your favorite market and go. That includes Salesforce Mobile, Salesforce Touch, and Chatter Mobile. We also, of course, have the Salesforce Platform, which is what we're focusing on today, where you can create your own custom mobile application to suit the needs of your employees or customers. And then, if you want to monetize on your mobile application, the App Exchange is very mobile friendly. So if you would like to put it up in the marketplace in the cloud. Now we do have our portal for Salesforce Platform Mobile Services. The URL to remember there is developer.force.com/mobile. This is basically our main landing page for our documentation, downloading the SDK, getting access to our mobile packs, our wiki articles, and more or less what you need to know to get up and running with a mobile application on the platform. So when we talk about hybrid, it's helpful if we think about it in terms of the full spectrum of mobile development. So on one end, we have native development, and that is where you're going to be coding in Objective-C or Java, and you're going to be compiling a binary application that's going to run right on the device. And then on the other end, we have HTML5 development, which is essentially leveraging that HTML, JavaScript, CSS skill to host some kind of mobile-friendly application on a third-party server, maybe something on Heroku or a Rackspace. So you're effectively creating a web page which is friendly for mobile clients. But we have hybrid as well, which exists somewhere in the middle of the two and shares features of both of those. The way a hybrid application effectively works is it is a native application. You can install it like a native app. You can delete it like a native app. It can have system preferences like a native app. But what that application actually is a highly customized web browser, which allows us to do a few cool tricks, but effectively is using an HTML-based application to render the app itself. And so you can use JavaScript and HTML and CSS to create the application, but it's going to look and behave like a native application to the user. Now, one of the very handy things about that is that we can start accessing native features with JavaScript, and we do this with a library most commonly known as Cordova. Cordova is a library that exists in two parts. One part is native and sits on the device, and the other part is JavaScript. And so through that JavaScript, you can access native features, and Cordova basically builds a bridge to that native section. So for instance, I could use Cordova to grab the camera, and I would bring up the camera UI, and I could take a picture, and I could grab the data from that picture, and I could send it back down to JavaScript. Or, and as we're going to see in a very soon-to-be upcoming demonstration, I could do things like access the actual local address book. So if I wanted to compare, say, contact information with address book information that exists on the phone, we could go use that bridge and grab and manipulate address book information. So let's actually jump right into that. Our first demonstration, we are going to start looking at taking some Visualforce and converting that into a hybrid application. So let me flip over to, not the FAQ, to my developer edition org here. And so this is standard DE org, but what I have is I have this Visualforce page here. I pull this out so I can resize it, make it a little bit friendlier. Yeah. There we go. So this is just a basic Visualforce page, and what it's doing is it is currently grabbing just the contacts that exist within my org. But you can see down here I have this section to also look at contacts that exist within. So if I wanted to quickly call somebody, I could just look it up here. I could click over to Rose. This would be a telephone link, so if I was running on the device, I could click the link and it would just call Rose up. And I can search for contacts, so if I want to search for Sean, I can do that and it'll reduce down to Sean. We don't have any address book information here, so we're not really comparing anything. And if we go to the actual code, we pull up Developer Console so that we can actually see what we're looking at when it comes to the Visualforce page. So this is the page. It looks much like what a Visualforce developer would expect. We've got a standard controller for contact. We are bringing in several libraries here. Basically, we're bringing in jQuery. We're bringing in some Cordova libraries. So this is that JavaScript portion of Cordova that we were talking about. We're also using this is a preview, this is a sneak peek of a project we're going to release later this month called Mobile Templates, which are some very handsome-looking pages and templates for you to start working with on your application. So if you want a nice business-friendly look and feel for your application, you can use these templates as a starting point. And then we also bring in some of the libraries from the Mobile SDK itself. And we can do that and use Cordova to do things like start accessing the actual contacts. So when I want to bring in all my contacts, the first thing I can do is I can actually talk to Apex. This is using JavaScript remoting. I can grab the data from my developer edition org, or if I've got Cordova, I can start filtering through the entries that I have on my address book and start displaying that information into the same interface. And then from there, we're basically using jQuery to fill out the page itself and start generating this list. So we have this Visualforce page. Right now it's only talking to JavaScript remoting. How could we use this and make it actually work like a hybrid application? In order to do that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use one of the new tools that we have with the Mobile SDK 2.0. We are introducing some node-based utilities which will make it very handy to use the Mobile SDK and to create sample applications. And there are two of those. If you wanted to create an Android one, you would use Force Droid. In this case, I'm using iOS, so I'm going to do Force iOS create. And you can see what it does is it asks me if what kind of application I want, native, hybrid remote, or hybrid local. In this case, we're going to point up to that remote Visualforce page. So what I want is hybrid remote. It's going to ask me for a name, some quick identification for the company. And now, because we are doing a remote application, it wants to know which Apex page it's supposed to point to. So we're going to say Apex phone book. will default to the directory we're currently in. And the next thing it wants to know is our connected app ID. And this connected app ID refers to a consumer key on a connected app definition. So let's close out Developer Console and take a look at that really quickly. I'm going to go over to Setup, filter down to Apps, click on Apps, and we're going to actually use this address demo definition. So when we're creating these sample applications, you do actually have the possibility of using a default demo key that we have within the Mobile SDK. We don't highly recommend that you do that. So it's really for just kicking the tires of the Mobile SDK. As soon as you start building out your application, one of the first things that you should do is you should go to Apps and create a new connected app definition. That's going to give you a consumer key which is specific to your application. So this is going to allow the application to identify itself through OAuth to our identity servers so that we can actually get the credentials and the token that we need to log in for the user. And we can see that we also have a few other options here. When we create the connected app, we can also select specific OAuth scope. So we can limit what this application could access when it's getting those credentials for the user. We also have our callback URL. Now, in a classic web application instance, this callback URL would actually refer to an HTTPS endpoint for the most part, and then the web application would grab that endpoint and handle the token in order to finish the OAuth flow. In this case, we don't have that kind of web server that's active, so we can use what I like to call a photocall. So this can be something other than HTTP, HTTPS. And what's doing is that highly customized web application or the browser application that is the container for our hybrid app. We've got an OAuth plugin that knows to look for that callback URL, and it will handle the rest of the token flow so that we can properly log into the platform. And then finally, we also have this new feature over here, which is screen locking and pin protection. This is something so that if you were using your application, you set your phone down and you walked away, and there was a little bit of a wait time there. Somebody picked up the phone after a certain time that application's been asleep. If somebody wanted to use the application, they'd be forced to put in a PIN that you had previously defined. So it provides an extra layer of protection for your applications and for your phone. So let's go ahead and grab our consumer key from our Connect app. We will put that into Force, and then our callback URL. We'll grab our callback URL, put that in there. Then we can see that Force iOS or Force Droid, if I was doing this for Android, runs through, creates the project that I need, says congratulations, you have successfully created your app. So let's see what we've got here. Let's go into Phone Book. It created this directory for me, and I've got a directory, but then the nice thing is it's also creating this Xcode project for me. So if I want to see what this application does, I can just go right to Xcode. So let's poke at what we got generated here. You can see we have our project definition, but we also have this www directory. And for a hybrid application, this is where the smarts is really going to live. Since we are pointing to a remote endpoint, all we really need here is the bootconfig.json. And this is the file that tells the Mobile SDK effectively what the configuration for your application is. What are we trying to do? What our consumer key is, our callback URL is, our OAuth scope. So a lot of that stuff that we entered in previously. And then since we're doing a remote application, it knows which Visualforce page to point to. So at this point, all I need to do is go to my simulator and hit run. And it will load up. And the OAuth flow is actually being handled for us in this case by the Mobile SDK. So I will put in my credentials. And then I'm going to do the virtual equivalent of type into the table in order to hide my very sensitive password, which for the folks scoring at home is not a password, just in case you were wondering. I will allow those permissions to go through, and then it's going to load my Visualforce page as my application. But now if I scroll down to address book, you can see I have one contact in my address book. I just have Mark Benioff. To be honest, if you have Mark Benioff's phone number, you probably don't need anybody else's. But when I click on a record, one of the things that it does is it compares the record between the local address book and my contacts up on Salesforce. So it sees here I have Mark locally, but I don't have Mark up on Salesforce. So it's giving me this option here. I want to save this up to Salesforce. Once it does that, it removes that option for me. We can scroll down. We can see now we have Mark Benioff both in the address book and the contacts. And if we go back to our browser and go to contacts, we can see that Mark Benioff has been successfully entered into our Salesforce org. And now if we want to do the opposite, say we have Jane here, it sees that she's up on Salesforce but not down on the address book. So I'm going to click that. And if we go out, we can see Jane is now in my address book as well. Now, I want to give you a quick tip here while we are showing this stuff. I'm going to pop over to Safari. This is something which is available if you're using Xcode, you've got Safari, you're on a Mac. I'm going to go back into Safari. If I go to Develop, you can see iPhone Simulator. One of the options is to actually use Web Inspector to log what's going on in the simulator itself. So for instance, if I click on Mark here, you can see we have a lot of activity over on the console log. These are console logs that are actually being kicked out by my JavaScript within the application. And if we compare that to Xcode, Xcode will also give you some feedback, but it's very noisy and it has a lot of extra information to it. It's not quite as clean as Safari is. The other nice thing about doing this through Safari is that you actually have bidirectional communication. So if I want to say hello webinar, I can kick that off and it will actually come up over into the phone simulator here. If I wanted to inspect or talk to any of the current variables that are being run, I can actually do that through the console right here. So very handy tip if you are trying to debug what's going on with your hybrid application. Safari can be a very excellent way of doing that. So let's slip back over to slides for a second. So we have this great new project called Mobile UI. One of the things that you might notice from this webinar, we are trying to give you a wide breadth of tools so that you have many different starting points depending on what kind of needs you have for building out your application. Mobile templates will be one of those once we launch them later this month. We also have this project, Mobile UI Elements, and Akhilesh, you were I believe you were the primary or only engineer on Mobile UI Elements. In fact, I voted that this project should be called Akhilesh's Awesome Mobile Components for UI Development on Devices, but I was told by marketing that may be a little bit too long. So why don't you give the audience a little bit of an overview of what Mobile UI is and how it pertains to hybrid.
Yep, thanks, Josh. So it would have been great if they had named it Akhilesh's Mobile UI Elements, but that's okay. This one sounds better, I think. Anyhow, so as Josh has been demoing earlier, that you can build a hybrid mobile application which talks to your device and you can just do it with HTML and web technologies. But if you are a beginner developer and not very familiar with all these technologies and haven't really done too much of mobile development in the past, getting started could be a pain. And because you have to worry about performance, you have to worry about responsive designs, you have to worry about how your UI and user experience will look like, how CSS3 animations will do. All these things could be too many things to handle if you're the first-time developer. With Mobile UI Elements, this is exactly what we're trying to solve. We want to make every HTML developer to be a mobile developer for Salesforce. Mobile UI Elements is essentially a simple set of directives which extend existing HTML5 tags to add new functionalities to Salesforce. For example, if you see in this presentation on this slide, we have a simple div tag which has SF role detail and SFS object, which is contact. What it does is it basically tells the framework that you want to render a detailed view, which is a complete detail of a particular contact object, including all its fields which have been defined on a page layout. So what this framework is doing, it reads all this configuration from the div tag and it does all the API calls behind the scenes to get the metadata information of what is the field level security, what is the layout configuration, what is the data that it needs to fetch, and lays it out in a responsive design and does all that in asynchronous AJAX calls behind the scenes and takes care of even offline support when you're running inside Mobile SDK. So with this single line of HTML, you're saying many lines of code which you would have to do otherwise as a beginner developer to make this all work. So essentially Mobile UI Elements this is an open source project, and it's built upon latest JavaScript technologies such as Backbone and Google Polymer, which Google just came out recently with in the Google I/O. It's completely Salesforce metadata driven, and we have tried to make it as customizable as possible so that you can change the look and feel of the page the way you want it to be while not worrying about how to grab the data and how to use the APIs on Salesforce to make it all work. And finally, obviously, it's all open source. It's all on GitHub, and we have the links of how to get the sample apps and how to get this code from GitHub at the end of the slide deck. So Josh, I believe, will show you a quick demo of how these work. But just to mention before that, we have currently 3 sets of elements. One is a list view, which basically list element, which basically renders a list of records, and you can drive that list through a SOQL query, through a SOQL query, or a simple MRU list for all the items that have been recently accessed on a particular object. And in this slide, you can see a detail view to render a detail of a particular record. And lastly, a form view, which is essentially to help you modify or add new records in Salesforce. And you're going to see a demo of this in the next slide, which Josh will just show us. Josh?
Yes, so let us kick over to a quick demonstration of exactly what Akhilesh is describing here. So I'm going to close this project out and stop it. Let us go grab a project that has the UI elements installed. Now, in order to create the project that you're seeing here, it was basically the exact same flow that we saw before using the Force iOS, or if you were doing Android, you could use Force Droid. Created a sample application, the difference being that this is a hybrid local sample. And when we have a hybrid local sample, www is going to get generated with an existing web application that's going to reside on the device. So everything we see here in this www directory will actually reside on the device itself. And so in order to get Akhilesh's demo running, basically I just replaced that existing www directory with the sample code from his GitHub account, or from the Force.com GitHub account. So if we look at bootconfig.json here, we see we still have a consumer key. We still have a callback. We're still using that photo call because we are still talking to the native device in order to complete the OAuth flow. But our start page here is pointing to a local page. So we're actually pointing to this jQuery mobile page. And you can see exactly what Akhilesh was describing here. We're using these HTML5 attributes like SF role and SF object. We can tell these divs exactly what kind of information we are trying to display here. So in this case, we're trying to display a list component, and that component is going to be talking to a contact S object type. If we wanted a detail element, we could use the SF role of detail and then just keep that contact. And if we scroll, if we see it mostly HTML, if we scroll down, there is a little bit of JavaScript. But what I want to point out here is this JavaScript is mostly doing things like low-level event handling, switching between views maybe, and this allows you to kind of customize a little bit how the application is working. What's not necessary to do is all that heavy lifting that Akhilesh was describing about what should the API call look like, how do I access the metadata information, what is the page layout that I want to display. That is being handled for you by Mobile UI itself. And so let's bring this into the simulator. I think what you can see is that if you're trying to build an application that's kind of that classic list view, edit view, detail view that's very common, Mobile UI is a very quick and easy way to create those. And I think my simulator got confused when I swapped out my project and didn't ask nicely. Let's pull that back up. There we go. Okay, so now we go back into OAuth flow. That once again do the equivalent of typing underneath the table. I spelled password correctly. Hit allow. And now what we're displaying, we're not going to a remote page. We're displaying the HTML that's actually being contained right on the device. and it's going out to the platform to do API calls in order to do the actual data. And you can see the result of the mobile UI is a very clean-looking list here. I can now go into Mark's new information. He's only got a phone number there. If we go into Ashley's, we can see we've got a little bit more data here. But you'll notice with the HTML here in the background, I didn't have to create a bunch of fields. I didn't have to guess what was on the page layout. Mobile UI is doing all that heavy lifting for me and it's generating the detailed view that I would want. And if I want to edit this, I can click this page and I get a very nice looking form. Maybe Ashley's name truly is not James. Maybe it is properly Jones. We'll hit done. And then when we click this button here, we say that this information here is saved. And if we went back into our org, go back into contacts, we can see that Ashley's correctly now named Ashley Jones. So once again, if you're looking for that kind of core experience, which is very common for mobile applications, list view, detail view, edit view, mobile UI is a very quick and easy way to get that interface up and running, and in this case, running on a local device. So let's talk about that for a second. So we just saw two demonstrations, which in some ways are very similar, but in some ways are very, very different. The first one, hybrid remote, pointing to a remote Visualforce page running on my Developer Edition. This, Developer Edition org. This provides easy access to Visualforce. So if there was, for instance, some Apex code that I wanted to leverage, maybe even standard controllers or an extension that I had already written, what I'm trying to do is build a mobile-friendly interface with some previous code, then it might be very, very attractive to use hybrid remote because I could basically create that mobile interface in Visualforce and I can just point it right up to Visualforce. So it gives us very easy access to some of that Force.com development. It is also possible to avoid API calls. The phone book demo that we are seeing uses only JavaScript remoting, so there are no API calls involved in the phone book demo itself. However, one of the big downsides of hybrid remote applications is that it's very difficult for offline because we have pushed all of the code and the logic, everything is running up in the cloud, as we like to say, and so it really depends on an active connection in order to be able to keep that application running correctly. It is possible to teach a remote application like that to behave more friendly for offline, but it requires something called an HTML5 manifest. Without going into too much detail, because it's honestly out of the scope of this webinar, HTML5 manifest, and I can tell you this from experience with working with it, is very difficult to really develop with, and it can be extremely difficult to test against, and so it turns into kind of a roadblock for trying to take a Visualforce page and turning it offline. Now, if we compare that to hybrid local is all JavaScript. There's no Apex component, there's no Visualforce component. We can build our entire application in just HTML, JavaScript, and CSS. And because all of that code and logic is being stored on the device itself, it makes it very, very easy to make that an offline-friendly application, especially with some of the features that Akhilesh is going to show you here in a moment. And that also gives us the added benefit, since we don't have those server-side calls for any kind of assets. Even if we're displaying things like large images or anything like that, we don't have to wait for that server latency to give us those assets back and then display it on the application. So there you go. Those are two directions that you can go for creating your hybrid app. And this is definitely one of those things that development teams should just kind of get in there, kick the tires, and make a conscious decision about which one of these routes is really appropriate for the kind of application you're doing. So it's one of those things that due diligence is definitely required. Really kind of one of the stars of our show today is the Salesforce Mobile SDK 2.0, which we have released to code-wise out to the public, but we are going to be doing a larger rollout and kind of a louder announcement of this along with some of the other projects that we are working on alongside with Mobile SDK 2.0 towards the end of this month, so keep an eye out for that. But Akhilesh, you are one of the primary mover and shakers on the Mobile SDK 2.0, so I'm going to hand the mic and the presentation over to you so that you can get everybody up to speed on some of the new great features.
Great, thanks. So Josh just actually demoed to us all the two options, the hybrid remote and hybrid local, to actually make any web developer a mobile developer. But to actually make any of these mobile applications hybrid, one of the major pieces that you need is the Mobile SDK. Mobile SDK turns any web application into a hybrid application by providing a hybrid container. So Mobile SDK was first launched almost 2 years ago at Dreamforce 2011, and we have been trying to add features which are the common use cases of many of the mobile applications built against Salesforce. For example, you have OAuth 2 for providing any authentication against Salesforce. If you are building an offline application, you need an offline data store, which is also secure and encrypted on the device. In 2.0, we are providing a SmartSync framework in Mobile SDK, which essentially means it will provide you ways to integrate data between your offline database and your cloud Salesforce platform, so that any changes which are happening across the two places, you can easily find the conflicts and easily synchronize the data between the two places. And obviously, we have a hybrid container to turn your web applications into mobile applications. And lastly, the API wrappers to make any API calls, any REST API calls to Salesforce. So all these features, we have tried to aim it for all kind of developers, for both Android and iOS platforms. So if you are doing a native application, you can use all these features. And if you are doing a hybrid application, you can still use all these features. So if you are an advanced developer, you can go to the details and you can do as much customizations as you want, and you can use these core pieces to build your as complicated application as you want. But if you're a hybrid application developer and if you don't want to do too many complicated things, all these features take care of a lot of things for you to make it simple for you to build these applications for mobile devices. And if you're building these applications, you can build it for any kind of purpose, for your employees, for your partner network, or even for your customers, and use our customer portals or communities to actually build awesome looking applications for mobile devices for your customer community. So going into details of some of these features, I want to first show how these features stack up to actually build your mobile application. So we want to talk about some of these features in the Mobile SDK in this slide. So since Mobile SDK is essentially a client-side framework, it talks to Salesforce through our web APIs, our REST APIs. So on the client side, in Mobile SDK, at the lowest level, we provide the OAuth 2 client library, which is essentially an implementation of our complete connected app policy. So as Josh was showing you earlier on the Salesforce side, that you can configure pin protection, you can configure your refresh token expirations, and all other policies to make sure that your data is secured on the mobile device. OAuth 2 client library in Mobile SDK implements all those features. So if you go leave your device for a while unlocked, the pin protection will automatically kick in and will lock your application so that no data is leaked from your application. And next time the user comes in, they will have to enter the PIN to actually get into the application. So as a developer of the mobile application, you would not need to write a single line of code to make that happen. The Mobile SDK takes care of it and takes care of all the security behind the scenes. Now, after the security is taken care of, we have added a layer of SmartStore, which is essentially an offline secured storage on the device, so that you can build your offline awesome applications and keep your data on the device securely and protected, and you don't have to worry about any of the data loss. This SmartStore feature is available for both your hybrid and the native applications. So these are some of the features which have been there since we launched our Mobile SDK, and we have been adding new features on top of them. And one of the major features we are adding in Mobile SDK 2.0 is the SmartSync data framework. And SmartSync data framework is currently only available for JavaScript-based applications, and we are hoping to add more features later on for the native side as well. But on the hybrid side right now, SmartSync framework will let you synchronize your data between your offline data store on the device, which is the SmartStore, and the data store on cloud, which is your Salesforce platform. So it will take care of some of the synchronizations there. It will tell you if there are any conflicts so that you can resolve of how you want to prioritize which changes. And we'll show some of those details in our coming slides and the demos. On top of these SDK features, we are building some open solutions in our Dev Evangelist program to make it more simpler for our developer community to build mobile applications. And one of these features is Mobile Packs. Mobile Packs has been launched some time ago, and we had some webinars also behind for them, which you can find, I think, on developerforce.com. And mobile packs is essentially targeted for developers who are experienced with some JavaScript frameworks, the common popular JavaScript frameworks such as Ember, Angular, Backbone, Knockout, and so on. So if you know these frameworks, you don't need to learn anything new about Salesforce. These frameworks automatically tie in all these SDK 2.0 features. So as if you're an experienced Angular developer, you can build simple Salesforce applications with really small learning curve, and you can build your applications for any mobile device using these mobile packs. You can find them also on developerforce.com. On top of these mobile packs, we are building the UI elements, which we demoed just a few slides ago. And this is targeted for more beginner developers who don't have high experience on JavaScript and HTML5, so that they don't need to learn any new framework, and just extend and write simple HTML, which will take care of rendering the whole UI for your web-based mobile application or a hybrid application for a mobile device. And finally, all these components that we build here, we have tried to do it in a form that they are compatible with all the other open source community-based frameworks such as jQuery Mobile, Ratchet, and things like that, which are great UI frameworks to build mobile-friendly UIs which are touch-optimized and responsive, and recognize all the gestures and animations and things like that. So you can combine all these features together and libraries together to build an awesome-looking application. And we have a bunch of samples also GitHub repos. So going into some of the details for some of the features, especially with the SmartStore. So SmartStore is one of the key features for if you are building offline supporting mobile application. You want some place to store your data, and in most cases you are building an enterprise application and you want to make sure that your data is secured on the device. And the way we achieve it is by using a SQL cipher, which basically encrypts using 256 AES encryption, and it encrypts all the database files on the device. It also uses the PIN from the user-provided PIN to actually generate the private key to make sure that it's hard to decrypt any of the data which is on the device. One more thing which we do here is we have built this SmartStore on top of SQLite storage, so that you get some of the flexibilities of SQL. But at the same time, we are providing a NoSQL interface to this data store so that you can store directly any of the JSON objects that you get back from your REST API calls. And not just from Salesforce API calls, you can grab data from anywhere, from any other data source, and you can store that into the SmartStore in Mobile SDK. The benefit of using a NoSQL storage is that if in case your metadata changes, if you add a new column on your table, if you remove any columns, if you do any other changes, you don't have to rebuild your table. You can just store the new JSON files or JSON responses that you get back from the REST API as is in the data store. Since it's a completely NoSQL store, it's a key value kind of store, you have just your, we call it soups basically, is every JSON is just like a raw text which gets stored on the data store as is. So when you get back the data, you get a JSON data back from the data store as well. So it's completely flexible to any metadata changes that you might have in your application in future, and it can easily adapt to those changes in your application. In SmartStore 2.0, we have added the support for SmartSQL, which is essentially we are now supporting more of the SQL kind syntax. So you can do advanced SQL queries, and you can do joins across tables and objects, and also you can run complex aggregate queries to run any analysis on the data you have on your device. And not to mention that these features are all available for both our native and hybrid developers, and also for both of our platforms, which is iOS and Android. So on SmartStore, as I was mentioning earlier, we have built a new framework in SDK 2.0, which is called SmartSync framework. So the reason we have done this is most of the applications are becoming, especially for mobile devices, are becoming more and more complicated because you have now more computing power on a mobile device. You can do a lot more computations, you can do a lot more animations, which you could not do earlier. So as you build more and more complicated mobile applications using web technologies, you need MVC kind of patterns now for your mobile application, for web applications as well. Now to support this MVC pattern, we have built the SmartSync framework ground up using some of the open source technologies such as Backbone.js. So we are extending the Backbone JavaScript library to provide a model-driven development architecture for your application so that you can define high-level object structure and be able to interact with the data not just in Salesforce Cloud Platform, but also locally on the device, and which will take care of any CRUD operations that you want to do. So just to show a quick example, we have on the slides on the right side. So if you see in this example, force.sObject is the base object, which is extension of the Backbone object. If you guys are familiar with Backbone, this will look very familiar to you. So force.sObject is the base object provided by the SmartSync framework. And if you want to get any data from Salesforce, and if you want to store any data offline and make any changes offline, and if you want to synchronize that back to Salesforce, in old way you would have to do many kind of things. You would have to do API calls. You would have to know APIs. You would have to do all the AJAX calls to get the data asynchronously. You would have to store that offline manually by calling some SmartStore API, and you will have to figure out the differences between Salesforce data and the local data to make sure you handle the conflicts, which is quite a lot of work to do if you're building your mobile application. And what we are trying to do in the SmartSync framework is by defining the simple force.sObject, we have encapsulated all that complexity behind this framework. So now if you want to interact with, say, account object on the Salesforce side, you basically extend the force.sObject class and you define a new class called account. And in the definition, you will say that you want to get the data from the sObject type, which is account, and you are interested in the field list, which is ID, name, industry, phone, owner name, etc. So this means that these are the fields, and this is the object that you want to really build your application against. So now when I instantiate a new instance for this class, all I need to do is define a new account object and give it an ID, which is this is the record ID which I want to grab the data for. And when I do account.fetch, the framework automatically takes care of getting and making an API call to Salesforce and grabbing all the data from Salesforce and storing it on the device locally so that you have it available for offline usage, and then making it available in the JavaScript object, which is account object, where you can modify and see the data which is gotten back from Salesforce. And now if you do any changes to this object in your application by using .set, and if you change the name, for example, to salesforce.com and save it back, this will save the data both in your offline data store on the device and also in Salesforce at the same time. And it will make sure that there are no conflicts that happened during this period. And if there were any conflicts, it will notify the developer of any differences that are there, which are found during the save process. So it should save you many times of code. Like at least we assume that should save you 10 times of code if you would have done this manually yourself. And not to mention, like, these things are very flexible, that we have tried to support flexible query types. You can do SOQL statements. You can try to fetch data based on most recently used records. You can try to fetch data using SmartSQL, which I just mentioned in the previous slide. And all these features are available also in our developer packs, because all the developer packs are built on top of SmartSync framework. So enough of slides. I'll show you a demo of how this all works. We have an application called Account Editor. It's a sample application which uses all the features of SmartStore and SmartSync 2.0 to demonstrate how these can be used in your mobile application. This sample app comes with the Mobile SDK, and you can grab the source of it from our GitHub repos. So jumping on the demo, this is my Account Editor app, which came with a GitHub repo from Mobile SDK. I'm going to run that in my iOS simulator, iPhone simulator. So all it's going to do is, as I was showing you in the slide earlier, it's defining a new account object, and it's trying to grab the basic fields, which is name, industry, ID, and things like that from Salesforce. And if you see, it generated a quick list for me for all the data which is there for me for the account object. And there's a flag called cached on the right side. So all the data which gets stored on the device gets flagged to show whether it is synchronized completely to Salesforce or if it has been changed since it was last synchronized with Salesforce. So, for example, if I make any change over here to United Oil and Gas Corp and try to change the industry from oil and gas to oil, done, save, all this data will be synchronized back to Salesforce and shows as cached. Now, if I go and try to create a new account, say Salesforce, industry CRM, and try to save that, this new record will also be created on the Salesforce side. So if I go refresh my page, my login here, I can see a new account has been created on Salesforce. And all we did behind the scenes using the SmartSync framework is calling the save method on it. And that automatically synchronized the data not just to Salesforce, but also on the offline storage. We'll jump into some of the examples and code more after this demo. So if I now try to go offline, so we are simulating offline in this example because I cannot really go offline, otherwise I'll lose the connection and I won't be able to demo what I'm trying to. So I'm simulating offline here by this button so that I'm telling my application to not make any API calls now and try to work as completely offline. So if I now try to make any changes here and say might change the name of my account to Salesforce phone, save it back, it's going to show here that this account has been locally updated only because I'm offline, so I cannot sync it back to the Salesforce. And if I go on Salesforce side and also try to change it here and maybe change it to desktop, save it back. So now I have created a conflict in this scenario. I've created a change on the Salesforce when I was online on the desktop side, and I've created a change on the device in the offline scenario. So now when I try to go online, this application, this is a sample application, is trying to use the SmartSync framework to push all the records, all the changes that have happened on the device to Salesforce. And if I try to now process this and push this change to Salesforce, it's going to say fail to sync because the changes have happened on the Salesforce side while this device was offline. So if I go on into this record and try to save it, it's going to now show me exactly the differences. So it basically used the SmartSync framework to figure out what exactly has changed on the Salesforce side since I tried to save the data offline on the device. And it will show me the difference has been the name change, which is Salesforce Desktop on the server side, whereas Salesforce Phone on the device. And I can say, I don't want to pick the one which is on the Salesforce. I want to pick the one which is I have on the device. I can say overwrite, and the framework will ignore all the changes on the server and push the changes which are on the device. So if I go back on my application, refresh Salesforce, I can see the name has been changed now to Salesforce Phone. So just to show quickly how this code works, I'm going to jump a little bit into the demo of the real HTML file. So account editor HTML file, you can find it on the GitHub in the repository in the sample applications. So if you go and open that HTML file, you will see some JavaScript at the bottom, which is defining these models. So the two important parts of our SmartSync framework is force.sObject, which basically is a model to define an interface to a Salesforce object, so you can grab any data for a particular record. And the other is a force.sObject collection, and as name tells it, it's basically a wrapper around a list of records. So if you want to work against a list of accounts or a list of contacts or any other list of objects, you want to use a force.sObject collection. And some of the definitions, definition properties that you want to define while using these SmartSync objects is, so in this case, I'm defining an account object, extending the force.sObject model, and I'm defining it a type, which is sObject type account, and I have a field list, which is the list of fields that I'm interested in while working on this object. The couple other things which I need to define in my application is the cache object. The cache object, when available, means that I want to store the data offline on the device when the SmartSync framework is fetching the data from the server. And this is essentially nothing but an instance of SmartStore object. And similarly, I have a cache for originals. this is required if I want to make sure that I do conflict management. So SmartSync will use this cache, the SmartStore cache, to make sure that it tracks all the changes that have happened on the device and all the changes that have happened on the Salesforce side to tell you exactly which fields changed and how they changed since the last update. And the last part is the cache mode, which basically tells the SmartSync framework of how to behave in different scenarios when it's online or offline. So we have 4 options here, which is cache only, cache first, server only, server first. So for example, in this case, if I'm offline in this scenario, I'm telling my SmartSync framework to only go against cache because I cannot really go against server. But when I'm online, I want to tell it all my read operations should be done cache because that will be fastest. I don't want to do any round trip to the server if the data is already available in the offline device on offline storage. But if it's not, and if it's any kind of update or read or update or delete, I want to actually go to the server first to make the changes first on the server before making changes on the device. So similarly, on the account collection, I'm defining the same cache objects, I'm defining a model, I'm defining a field list which I'm interested in, and lastly, there's a config which basically tells me that if I'm offline, I want to run a smart SQL, as you can see here in this example, where I'm trying to go against the account soup, which is the SmartStore soup, to fetch my data from the SmartStore, which I've stored offline. But in the cases of online, I want to go against my MRU, which is the set of records which I've recently used or viewed. Or if I'm trying to do any search, I want to run a SOQL query, which is defined over here in the select statement. So the framework is very customizable. You can use any object collection if you want to work against a set of records, and if you want to work against a particular record, you can define object and extend it to make any changes you want. Going back to the presentation, so this was a demo for our account editor application, comes in as a part of the Mobile SDK. And now I'll hand over to Josh to talk a little bit about our mobile packs and take it forward. Josh?
All righty. Thank you, Akhilesh. Some really amazing stuff that's been coming out with the development alongside the Mobile SDK itself. Now, along with, we keep talking about how we're trying to give you a broad range of tools so that you can have the starting point of your choice in order to build the application you need. Things like mobile templates. We did the demonstration for mobile UI. This excellent example code that Akhilesh was showing for using SmartSync. Another tool we have in that pack is our mobile packs, which is to help jumpstart your web and hybrid mobile development. And what we've done here is we've taken modern, popular JavaScript frameworks, and we have given you that head start in creating the application and showing you how you can use OAuth and access the APIs and basically get a very simple sample application up and running on that framework so that you can focus on creating the application that you want and not necessarily all of those core pieces of functionality required for a mobile app. And currently we have 3 of them out there. We've got jQuery Mobile, AngularJS, and Backbone.js. But as I keep noting, we're giving you guys kind of a sneak preview of some of the things with Mobile SDK 2.0 and some of these projects here today. We are going to be doing a larger rollout towards the end of the month, which is going to include a broader range of mobile packs that we'll be releasing. And of course, we would love to hear from you. So if you are a JavaScript developer and you have a framework of choice that is near and dear to your heart, give us a shout out on one of those social media channels we mentioned before. Shoot us a message on Twitter and let us know what kind of framework that you would like to see supported as a mobile pack down the road. Okay, so we've shown you a lot of different things today, and we want to make sure that you can get your hands on the different demos and code samples that we've been showing. If you would like to install that Visualforce phone book demonstration we did at the start, this bit.ly link, mobile VF phone book, you can log into your DORG, you can click on this link, and we'll install an unmanaged package for you, which means that you can just run it right away, or you can go in and start poking around at the different pieces of code that make it work. We also have the installation links here if you want to see the package. Actually, this is the package description for the NPM tools, which let you use the Mobile SDK itself, either on iOS or Android. Force iOS is the NPM package for iOS. ForceDroid, the NPM package for Android. And then we also have links if you want to see the actual code behind the Mobile SDK and some of the sample applications that Akhilesh was showing, including that account manager demonstration. You can go to bit.ly Mobile SDK iOS or bit.ly Mobile SDK Droid. And then finally, the mobile UI is kind of its own project. You can look at bit.ly Mobile UI Elements if you would like to see a sample application running on the Mobile UI framework. And if you happen to be, if you're watching this webinar and you are new to the platform, most of you probably have a Developer Edition account, but never hurts to have another one. Developer.force.com/join. It is free. There is no set expiration date. We will not call you asking if you want magazine subscriptions or anything like that. That is your playground to test out the Salesforce platform. And I would love to see, as your homework assignment, if people going and installing a mobile pack, installing mobile elements, go to developer.force.com/mobile or the links that we had shown previously. Which, by the way, we are putting into the chat window. So if you are wondering what that last slide, what links we're having, please keep an eye out in the chat window for all these links that I'm throwing at you right now. Go grab some of this stuff and create some demonstrations and then tweet us back, tweet me back. I'd love to see what the community is doing with some of these new tools that we're putting out there. And for learning the platform in general, developer.force.com, which includes discussion boards if you want to ask questions and get answers from community members and Salesforce employees. And finally, we have some quick tutorials at bit.ly/dev-cloud-apps if you want some quick guides to getting up and running on building an application in the cloud. We have a few upcoming events. July 24th, from sandbox to production, demystifying Force.com release management. In August, we are featuring Salesforce API series, integrating applications with Force.com. And then coming soon, we will be announcing these dates shortly. We are going to do 2 webinars, building iOS applications and building Android applications with the mobile packs. And in fact, our last webinar, if you're wondering for more information about mobile packs, our last webinar focused on the mobile packs and actually gave a great highlight on the Angular framework itself. We've been focusing a lot on hybrid. We've been focusing a lot on JavaScript. We do want to give native development a little bit of love. Once again, our strategy is not to push hybrid versus native or anything like that. We want to make sure that we have the tools that make sense for your development team to build the application that you need. And then finally, we will be coming out with a webinar Salesforce API series, the Service Cloud APIs. Now, please give us a little bit of feedback. We would love to know how we did today. That link is bit.ly/Mobile SDK Hybrid. We do take your feedback and comments very seriously, and they do help us iterate this program so that we can get better in the future. Now, we are going to take some Q&A. One of the questions that we got was actually a lot of questions that we were getting, and I want to clear this up so that we're specific. One of the questions we were getting was Xcode versus Eclipse. Akhilesh and I obviously have a preference to working with Xcode and iOS. I have also dabbled with Android, but I want to be very clear here. Everything you're seeing here is feature parity between iOS and Android. So if you want to develop with the Android SDK using Eclipse, you would just use the ForceDroid application instead of the Force iOS application, and you could be running all the same code and all the same demonstrations that we're seeing here. An interesting follow-up question that came with after that, and I'd like to thank the panelists who answered this because I wasn't certain about this when we started this webinar, was I showed you that trick about being able to use Safari to talk directly to Simulator and use console.log, and the question was if there was any equivalent for that if you were developing on Windows and Androids, and the answer is yes. Android has a USB debugging option which allows you to use Chrome to talk directly to the device. So you could use that as a way to also use a web inspector friendly style for debugging this kind of information and take a look at what the application is doing. And finally, there's also a product called Winery, which Akhilesh himself actually introduced me to a couple Dreamforces ago, which allows you to set up a remote server which can also access the application log, and you get that kind of nice console.log sort of look and feel to it. Now, Akhilesh, we also got some questions about things like responsive design. and how we can take these pages and convert them into something that's just friendly, not just on iPhone, but iPhone, iPad, different Android devices. I think you've worked with some of this. My understanding is that responsive design is something that can be built into basically any application that's using a responsive, friendly framework. Can you kind of give us an overview of any of the samples that we're doing and how they deal with the responsive design, or maybe some tips somebody could use in order to build a responsive, friendly application?
Yeah, so there are many open source JavaScript and CSS frameworks to help you build responsive applications which adapt based on the screen available on your device, such as on a tablet you have a bigger screen, or phone if you have a smaller screen. So there are frameworks like all the mobile frameworks right now, the open source such as jQuery Mobile has already that built-in responsive framework in it. You can use Bootstrap, you can use Foundation, and many similar CSS frameworks. Even the mobile UI elements come with a CSS file, which helps it make it completely responsive. So if you go from a phone to a tablet, mobile UI elements will adapt to show a detailed view, which is like 2-column versus 1-column in different scenarios. So yeah, there are multiple options, and I'm sure you can find all of these in open source and GitHub and many other places. And feel free to ask us if you have any specific questions on any particular library.
So a couple other questions that we got, if I'm kind of grouping these together, and this is possibly one of the most common conversations that I have with mobile developers in Akhilesh. I'm sure you probably have a similar experience. And the question is, and we kind of mentioned this towards the end of the webinar, is this concept of hybrid or HTML development versus native development? What are some of the pros and the cons there? And it really is, it's kind of a multi-dimensional answer, to be quite honest, because in one sense, you should probably be looking at the kind of developer experience that you have. If you have people who have Visualforce experience, HTML5 experience, it's probably good to try to leverage that kind of experience in the first place. But of course, if you have access to a native iOS developer or a Java developer, then it's a lot easier to get up and running with the native development itself. Well, one of the specific questions we got was key differences between what Cordova can apply to a hybrid application versus what, if I could in iOS and I didn't need to use Cordova, what are some of the distinctions there? And I think the best way to describe that is that what Cordova is going to apply for an HTML5 application is really a core set of native functionality which is shared by many different platforms. So that's going to be things that are common across smartphones, and it doesn't necessarily matter what the make and model that smartphone is, if it's a Windows phone or an Android phone or an iOS phone. So it's going to give you things like, camera and address book and a lot of things we're very familiar with. But the advantage of doing something like pure iOS development is that if you were wanting to access something that is part of the iOS framework itself and is a feature specific to the iPhone, then that is not something that Cordova is going to be able to give you access to. So I don't know, Akhilesh, do you have any other kind of hints or insights into some of the core differences between doing a hybrid and a native application?
No, it's just about your particular choice on your own experience and the kind of complexity of the application you're trying to build. So and obviously the lastly is if you're supporting multiple devices or not. So it just boils down to the exact scenario and exact problem you're trying to solve and what kind of skill sets you have. But things are possible in both places.
Yeah. And so finally, I actually want to bring up one of the previous questions that we had before about being able to kind of test that whole offline mode in a specific way. When you were showing that account manager demonstration and you clicked offline, that was actually catching a flag or changing a flag in the application so the application could fake offline connectivity. One thing to bring up there is that the Cordova plugin does allow you to check the actual connectivity on the phone, so obviously you wouldn't necessarily need to fake that for your production application. It could detect whether or not the phone has connectivity. And the other thing, and Ak, maybe you can give us a quick overview of it. I believe it's possible. So SmartStore itself and SmartSync on top of it goes through SQL Cipher for encryption, goes to SQLite for storage. But if you were, say, developing on a browser and you wanted to fake that out, you guys are developing a concept called mock store or mock storage, which allowed me to do that. Can you give us some more details on that?
Yeah, exactly. So MockStore is essentially a JavaScript file which we have also made it available through Mobile SDK, and it is essentially to help you build mobile applications with offline support and quickly test them on your regular web browser. So building a hybrid application inside and running it inside a simulator, as Josh showed you, that you have some things available to actually debug them. You have a console, you have some sort of web inspector, but there are still limitations of what you can do there. So with the SmartStore, with the MockStore, actually, you can actually build it directly inside a Chrome browser or Safari browser and test your application and debug and what you want to do. And all the data gets stored in form of a session storage on the HTML5 browser, so that everything is kind of in completely clear text of how data is getting stored on the machine, and you can easily look at that and make any modifications as you want. But also I want to mention that Mock SmartStore does try to simulate as much as it's possible for SmartStore, but it does have some limits because it's using just a session storage, which is key value store, instead of using a SQL-like storage, which is sort of more advanced and can do more complicated things like joins and aggregate functions. But yeah, for basic applications, you can easily test and make sure that your application runs fine within a browser and should run similarly when you replace MockStore with a regular SmartStore in your native or hybrid application.
Sounds excellent. Well, we have actually run a little bit past the hour. My apologies if I made anybody late to any meetings, especially if those were particularly important ones. But we are very happy to have you, and always prefer to talk to developers for longer periods of time as opposed to shorter periods of time. I want to thank all of our handsome panelists who were helping out answering questions today, and Lauren Grau, who helped organize and kept Akhilesh and I in line as we were doing the webinar itself. And Akhilesh, thanks to you for some great information to our developers.
Great. Thanks, Josh, and thanks everyone for joining this webinar.
All right, thanks everybody, and have yourselves a great day.